Judge Mathis sets a trap for Jasmine Crockett. She turns the tables instantly. The glare of the studio lights, the grandeur of the iconic burgundy and gold set, and the familiar rumble of anticipation in the audience. It was every bit the televised courtroom experience fans had come to expect from Judge Greg Mathis's legendary show. But on this day, the rules of TV justice were about to change, and neither the judge nor his devoted followers were prepared for what was coming next. Judge Mathis, celebrated for his no-nonsense wisdom and his reputation as a crusader against performative politicians, entered the courtroom that morning with a plan. For over 2 decades, viewers had watched him grill guests, cut through excuses, and deliver tough love to everyone who dared sit before him. He'd built an empire as television's ultimate arbiter, a father figure dispensing order in a world gone mad. And today, his target was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a rising star in Washington known for clashing with power brokers and racking up viral moments with her uncompromising style. The crowd, packed with longtime fans who'd traveled from across the country, buzzed with anticipation. They wanted to see another upstart put in their place, or at the very least to witness the spectacle of a stern judge taking a lawmaker to task. What they didn't expect was to see their hero lose control of his own courtroom, outmaneuvered by an opponent every bit as sharp and battle-tested as he was. Jasmine Crockett entered with an air of unfazed resolve. She wore a bold burgundy blazer that matched the set. It was either fashion symbolism or fate. Crockett brought with her not just the poise of a seasoned attorney, but the tenacity learned fighting uphill battles in real courtrooms and city halls. She wasn't here to play by anyone's script, least of all Mathis's. Unflappable, she exuded the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen traps before and preferred to walk straight into them, dismantle them, and redefine the rules. Judge Mathis wasted no time. The first question came barbed and loaded, accusing Crockett of hiding behind a facade of justice while her record supposedly told a different story. The audience, expecting a familiar stern reprimand and an awkward guest retreat, instead heard a calm, chilling response. Crockett had come armed with receipts. For a brief moment, the legendary judge's famed composure faltered. Through the lens of millions, the power balance in television justice shifted. This wasn't just a courtroom cross-examination or another routine political grilling. In that electric stare-down, cameras rolling, producers scrambling behind the lens, and a studio full of spectators holding their breath, a titanic collision unfolded. 2 self-made icons faced off. One the guardian of tradition, revered because he'd made accountability an institution. The other a disruptor from the new school, defending her generation's right to demand more than old answers to old problems. Fans came for the safety of spectacle. Instead, they witnessed the discomfort of genuine confrontation, unscripted and raw. It was the moment Judge Mathis's mantra of order in the court was put to its toughest test, a test not of law, but of who really commands justice when the cameras are rolling. And as Crockett's revelations and calm defiance mounted, the audience began to realize that today, the trial wasn't about one politician's record or one judge's reputation. It was about exposing who holds the real power when the lights are brightest, the gatekeepers of the old guard, or the new voices redefining the meaning of accountability. The stage was set for a showdown that would be replayed, analyzed, and argued over for weeks to come. A showdown where, for the first time, the outcome wasn't certain, and so began the day TV justice was truly put on trial. It didn't feel like just another taping. As security checked tickets and the crowd filed past the velvet ropes, the atmosphere inside Judge Mathis's studio was anything but casual. Studio producers hovered near the stage, double-checking scripts, mics, and camera angles, while ushers hurried longtime fans into their seats. Under the iconic burgundy and gold set, so familiar from millions of screens, the air shimmered with more than just anticipation. It felt thick with possibility, or maybe danger. To the audience, many of whom had watched Mathis for years, the set was sacred ground. This was where justice was served, where excuses went to die, and where the gruff wisdom of Detroit's toughest judge met the showbiz polish of Los Angeles. Photographs hung overhead from past infamous cases, teary reunions, dramatic lectures, the unmistakable moment a gavel falls. It was a myth-making space, built to glorify the power of one man's judgment, until tonight. Camera operators did last-minute focus pulls as the studio lights ramped up, casting everything in unforgiving clarity. From the bench, Judge Mathis glanced down at his notes with his trademark scowl, but even he seemed to sense the shift in energy. This wasn't going to be the normal parade of small claims or family squabbles. Today's guest was not some desperate litigant. Today, the defendant was a sitting member of Congress, Jasmine Crockett, whose very name had been shorthand for upending expectations both within and beyond the Beltway. Crockett's entrance sent a ripple through the crowd. Some whispered recognition, her viral clips grilling CEOs in committee, her reputation for dismantling worn-out talking points with surgical poise. She looked the part, sharp blazer, high ponytail, and an air that was both approachable and utterly unshakable. If anyone wondered whether she felt out of place, the answer was clear. The moment she took the witness chair and calmly sized up the room before locking eyes with her host. For the first time, the rigid lines of courtroom TV blurred into something new, a true political battlefield. Here, in front of 200 expectant faces and millions at home, Crockett and Mathis became proxies for rival American archetypes. On one side, the iron-fisted judge, television royalty, trusted by viewers for his cutting candor and refusal to pander. On the other, the next-generation reformer, battle-tested, data-driven, and riding a wave of grassroots support. The pressure was amplified by the elaborate set pieces, towering columns, courtroom flags, a bench that made even the boldest guests seem small. But as cameras rolled, it became clear that this architectural authority wouldn't be enough to control the narrative tonight. In Mathis's trademark challenge, "Are you here to defend your actions or just another politician with fancy words?" the line was not just a question, it was an invitation to battle. Expectations were high. Judge Mathis's fans anticipated a familiar dance, probing questions, teachable moments, the restoration of moral order by hour's end. But behind the nervous laughter and applause, there was something else, a sense that the script might be slipping away. The air vibrated with unresolved questions. Who would control the gavel when tradition collided with disruption? Would the veneer of courtroom authority withstand a challenger who'd built her life on overcoming odds, not seeking approval? Tonight, the real stakes weren't just legal, but personal, generational, political. This wasn't just a show, it was a trial for television itself, and for every comfortable assumption it sold about who truly gets the last word when justice and power mix on the national stage. Long before Judge Mathis and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett clashed in front of studio lights and millions of viewers, both had already proven themselves in grittier, less forgiving arenas. Their paths to this showdown could not have been more different, yet each journey forged a contender ready to disrupt any room, no matter how stacked the odds. Rising from Detroit's unforgiving neighborhoods, Greg Mathis didn't inherit status or shortcuts. Every rung on his ladder was earned through raw hustle and an instinct for survival. As a kid, he watched his single mother juggle triple shifts just to keep food on the table, absorbing early the lessons of personal responsibility and self-reliance. Those lessons shaped his worldview and, by his own admission, hardened his standards for what counted as excuses. Law school didn't come easy. Mathis attended night classes, drove cabs by day, and found himself more than once on the brink of dropping out. But that brush with failure only sharpened his edge. Winning his first judicial post was a minor miracle. He beat better-funded opponents by knocking on doors, speaking bluntly, and earning a reputation as a man not fooled by slick answers or political posturing. When network producers spotted his unfiltered authenticity in those early district court hearings, they saw ratings gold. What followed was a television career that made his stern, unyielding persona a staple of American pop culture, turning an inner-city survivor into the nation's TV judge, admired by fans for cutting through noise with piercing, sometimes uncomfortable truth. But behind the robes and the ratings was always the rebel, a man who never fully trusted the system in which he'd made his name, critical of trends he saw as empty grandstanding and desperate to keep the focus on real accountability, even if it meant calling out sacred cows from either side of the aisle. While Judge Mathis found his voice in the echo of gavels, Jasmine Crockett's journey started in the crammed apartments of St. Louis, watching her single mother battle adversity with the force of sheer will. From a young age, Crockett learned what it meant to fight for every inch: scholarships, side jobs, and a seat in law school that came only after relentless advocacy and late nights of studying when most classmates slept soundly. Crockett built her law career not in glass towers but at the intersections where justice was often denied, defending those without privilege, challenging powerful police unions, and winning cases that other attorneys called hopeless. The stakes were never abstract. Every courtroom win meant a family put back together or an injustice overturned. Her determination forged a style that was fearless and sometimes, to insiders, even abrasive. But for clients and supporters, Crockett was the rare kind of advocate who led from the front, refusing to accept silence or submission, no matter who sat on the other side of the courtroom. Her jump to Congress wasn't orchestrated by party insiders. Instead, it was the result of relentless grassroots work. Late nights organizing in community halls, viral committee interrogations, and a commitment to criminal justice reform that put her on the radar of national figures and skeptical voters alike. She didn't wait her turn. She took it and made her mark from day one by questioning, challenging, and refusing to be intimidated by rules designed to keep newcomers down. For all their contrasts, Mathis the enforcer, Crockett the reformer, their stories ran parallel threads. Both knew what it meant to earn, not inherit, respect. Both built reputations that defied stereotypes. Mathis as the judge who cut through excuses regardless of politics. Crockett as the congresswoman who had been in more trenches than committee rooms. And both, in their own way, came to represent the hunger for accountability in a system where easy answers rarely told the real story. Backed by hard-earned experience and unvarnished self-belief, neither needed a script to prove their worth as the showdown began. In the clash between courtroom veteran and the rising reformer, the tension wasn't just personal, it was generational, cultural, and as combustible as the years that shaped them. The audience watching could sense it. These weren't just two figures thrown together by television fate, but the culmination of decades of grit, fought for and never given. The first moments of this televised confrontation blurred the lines between legal drama and political chess. Even before the cameras rolled, anticipation simmered, a sense that something unscripted was about to spark. Judge Mathis, seasoned by decades in court and on air, began with the air of a man entirely in control, scanning his notes, preparing to carve into his guest with the authority that had made him a television mainstay. His plan was deceptively simple: use his courtroom as a stage to challenge Crockett's credibility, to affirm his reputation as the ultimate voice of justice, and, above all, to reinforce for every viewer that TV justice done his way could not be outmaneuvered by new-school political bravado. Mathis's opening salvo was sharp, designed both to provoke and to test. "Congresswoman, you talk a big game about justice, but your voting record paints another story. Are you here to defend your record, or are you just another politician spinning empty words?" The words echoed, deliberately shattering the thin veneer of civility. Even some in the audience cringed, sensing the stakes had instantly risen. Mathis's approach was surgical. He'd already stacked the deck, armed with facts he believed would trip up his adversary, ready with stats from his briefing book, practiced in the art of cutting off evasive answers. For longtime viewers, this was classic Mathis: forceful cue, questioning, withering stares, and the certainty that he alone could break through spin. He placed himself as the firewall against performative politics, determined that this rising political star would not use his courtroom for a viral soundbite. But Jasmine Crockett was no political rookie and no ordinary adversary. Her eyes, steady and unflinching, betrayed none of the nerves others might have felt under such scrutiny. She had walked into the studio with every intention of seizing the ground Judge Mathis considered his own, and she had come prepared, not just to play defense, but to flip the script on her interrogator. As Mathis tightened the screws, Crockett let the silence do some of the work, refusing to fill the gaps with nervous deflections. Instead, she acknowledged each question with a calm boldness, brushing aside insinuations about her record by referencing concrete legislative hurdles, how bills are shaped, delayed, or blocked in the labyrinth of Congress. But it was clear she had more than explanations in her arsenal. She waited for Mathis to lean in a little farther, to load his next challenge. Then, with surgical precision, Crockett made her move. "Before you go any further, Judge, maybe we should talk about your record," she said, her tone sharp but unwavering. "Because I brought receipts, and what I have to share might surprise everyone here." In an instant, the power dynamic shifted. Murmuring swept through the audience, and even Mathis's veteran production team scrambled, sensing unpredictable territory ahead. Crockett had anticipated Mathis's trap and set her own. While he had counted on controlling the tempo, she gradually took over, steering the conversation into new waters. With each calmly delivered answer, she exposed the judge's underlying strategy, not only to scrutinize her, but to leverage the entire show as a referendum on Maudie. Earn political activism. What he hadn't realized was that Crockett had come prepared to put his own motives and alliances under the same microscope. Every question and answer deepened the intrigue. The clash was no longer about optics or viral moments. It had become a contest of preparation, a chess match of tactics and counter moves. For every power play unleashed by Mathis, Crockett responded with patience, surprising candor, and those infamous receipts that would soon set the courtroom and the internet ablaze. The audience, swept up in this high-stakes cross-examination, sensed history in the making as the early moves made it clear. This courtroom was as much a political battlefield as it was a set. The real drama was only just beginning, and the next revelation would hit harder than anyone expected. The studio's temperature seemed to drop as Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her steady gaze cutting through the glare of the lights. The audience, once firmly anchored by Judge Mathis's booming voice, now found itself drifting, as if pulled by an unseen tide, shifting toward the witness chair instead of the bench. Anyone expecting Crockett to fold under tough questioning quickly realized she had come not just prepared to defend herself, but to redefine the encounter. Judge Mathis fired another salvo. "Congresswoman, what have you really done? Outside of speeches and social media moments, what laws have you passed that actually matter?" His words, sharpened for maximum impact, echoed in a room conditioned to expect capitulation. But Crockett's reply was calm, surgical. "Judge, before we discuss my record, let's talk about yours, because I brought receipts today and they tell a very different story." A ripple swept through the crowd. Crockett methodically opened her folder, revealing she had not only anticipated the judge's lines of attack, but she had foreseen them. She explained, "3 weeks ago, your production company signed a $2.3 million contract with a private prison group, one that spent years buying against criminal justice reform." The audience collectively inhaled, their loyalty suddenly balanced on a precipice. Studio staffers behind the scenes whispered nervously as Crockett continued, "It's public record, Judge. Anyone can look it up. And it happened the same week you started criticizing reformers like me in your opening monologues." Crockett's voice never wavered. She drew out a copy of the contract and, with deliberate precision, placed it where the cameras could catch every word. It was evidence, not speculation, not rumor, delivered with the expertise of a practiced attorney. "You've spoken about justice for decades, but this document suggests your priorities might be more complicated." From the bench, Judge Mathis's composure cracked for the first time. His answers, normally swift and cutting, became defensive. "My business dealings have nothing to do with justice. I've always fought for what's right, long before you were in Congress." It was a line the old script demanded, but the momentum had already shifted. Crockett pressed on, unflinching, refusing to let the judge hijack the narrative. Producing a stack of emails, she began to read aloud. "Thank you for agreeing to help shift the narrative. Having Judge Mathis challenge legislation would be valuable to our legislative strategy." The words didn't just hang in the air, they detonated. Gasps, a few scattered cheers, and the buzz of dozens of phones instantly uploading video snippets. The audience knew they were witnessing live television history. Crockett didn't gloat. Her tone was measured, even when the judge tried to interject. "You asked about my record? Here it is." She listed point by point her co-sponsored bills on rehabilitation and accountability, her bipartisan wins, her record of freeing wrongfully convicted people, and her efforts to expose corruption, all while refusing money from the people profiting off injustice. "While you were making deals in this studio, I was making change in real courtrooms." The rumble of the room built from nervous shuffling to electric applause as she concluded. "This isn't just about politics or performance. It's about who you're really fighting for, those who profit from keeping things broken, or the people who need justice most." Judge Mathis, for perhaps the first time in 2 decades, found himself speechless. The courtroom, which had long echoed with the certainty of his authority, was now under the command of a new voice, one that brought the receipts, exposed the motivations behind the curtain, and forced everyone watching to reconsider what real justice looks like. And if there was any doubt before, it vanished in that moment. The power dynamic in the room had shifted, and the rest of the showdown would play out in the court of public opinion, with Crockett already several moves ahead. The hum in the studio was more than nerves. It was anticipation distilled into electricity. With her evidence in hand, Jasmine Crockett stood ready to do more than merely parry Judge Mathis's accusations. She was about to go on offense. The moment was no longer just about reputations. It was about truth broadcast in real time, made raw by the stakes and the lights. Crockett placed a copy of the private prison contract on the judge's bench, a public record with Mathis Entertainment's name at the top. The audience strained to read the bold headings, every pair of eyes catching the $2.3 million figure that shimmered in the glare. The room fell into uneasy silence. Inside the control booth, producers gripped their headsets, torn between writing the ratings spike and wondering if they should cut to commercial. "What does this have to do with my show?" Mathis finally demanded, his voice edged with disbelief. No answer came right away. Instead, Crockett produced a printed email, its company letterhead visible to anyone within 10 feet. The silence was so thick, even the whirring of the studio cameras seemed intrusive. Slowly, deliberately, Crockett read, "Thank you for agreeing to help shift the narrative on criminal justice reform. The push by legislators like Crockett threatens our business model. Having Judge Mathis challenge their effectiveness will be incredibly valuable to our legislative strategy." The final sentence landed with a thud. The crowd gasped aloud. Several audience members, their allegiance to the judge suddenly in question, started filming with their phones. The sound of dozens of notifications chirped softly in the background as whispers spread through the rows. Mathis's confident mask faltered. There was an uncharacteristic flush to his cheeks. "Emails can be taken out of context," he stammered, reaching for his notes as if they might provide shelter from the oncoming storm. But Crockett didn't let up. She lifted another document, this time a summary of social media activity from the same week the contract was signed and the correspondence exchanged. "Funny how your public stance shifted the day this agreement was finalized, Judge," she noted, her voice steady and unimpressed by the swirl of protest. Viewers at home could feel the tension radiating from their screens. Social media feeds exploded. Hashtag Mathis exposed, hashtag Crockett receipts, and #who judges. The judge all started to trend. Clips from the broadcast were chopped, remixed, and captioned with astonished commentary. Within minutes, law professors, activists, and former guests on the show weighed in, some defending the judge, others expressing their shock at the perceived hypocrisy. Meanwhile, in the studio, Crockett pressed her advantage. "You've made a career out of holding others to account. But isn't it time someone did the same for you?" she asked, eyes locked with Mathis's as the crowd shifted audibly into her corner. The Jew, DG, lost for words, tried again to explain the separation between his advocacy and his business, but the audience's attention was elsewhere. The spell was broken, not by the documents, but by the stark contrast between their contents and the judge's years of televised moral certainty. The show's usual one-way flow of judgment and wisdom had reversed course, and Crockett now dictated the tempo. For perhaps the first time, America watched Judge Mathis struggle to regain control, not just of the show, but of the very narrative he'd mastered for so long. As applause broke from pockets of the audience, hesitant at first, then thunderous, one thing was clear: something extraordinary had happened. Crockett hadn't just survived the hot seat, she'd seized the moment, turned scrutiny into a spotlight, and left everyone, inside the courtroom and across the nation, wondering what other truths lay hidden behind the world's most powerful platforms. With each new revelation, the divide in the studio became more pronounced. Supporters of the judge looked stunned, while those rallying to Crockett felt vindicated. It was clear this was no longer just a feud between two personalities. It was a reckoning with the very concept of public accountability, staged not in Congress or a real court, but on national television, in front of an audience hungry for something real. The studio shifted from stunned silence to grudging admiration as Jasmine Crockett took command, not just of the conversation, but of the perception of what real accomplishment looked like. While Judge Mathis had always measured impact in ratings, fan adoration, and viral moments, his legacy list defined by sound bites and decisive gavel drops, Crockett was about to reveal a record far removed from the polished world of TV justice. With clarity and resolve, Crockett began to tally her actual wins, not for applause, but to spotlight the gulf between performance and real progress. Each item wasn't just a line on a resume. It was a ripple felt by families, defendants, and those for whom the abstract became urgent reality. Crockett reminded viewers that her journey was grounded not in monologues but in court victories, freed clients, and battle-tested reforms that outlasted the news cycle. And then she drew a clean line, the one that separated lasting wins from fleeting spectacle. Crockett's legacy list was messy and human, full of setbacks, bruising committee fights, and slow progress. But every bullet point was tied to a measurable win. In contrast, Judge Mathis's decades in television, once unassailable, suddenly looked fragile, defined more by who watched than who benefited. As the audience processed the contrast, the message was unmistakable. In the age of instant judgment, only real wins, not viral moments, could stand the test of history. The fight for justice was never won in the spotlight. It was built, bit by bit, in the lives touched and the laws changed. And on this day, Crockett had pulled back the curtain, leaving America to rethink whose lists matter most. The atmosphere in Judge Mathis's courtroom had always tilted in his favor, his branding, his audience, his rules. But after Crockett's volley of receipts and her running tally of substantial wins, something fundamental began to change. You could feel it. The air crackled with a different sort of anticipation, less about what the judge would say next and more about how far Crockett might go in redefining the rules of the room. It started with the small things, the details that only the sharpest audience members caught. Phones went from perched in laps to prominently filming, not for memorabilia, but to document the moment history slipped away from its expected script. Some of Mathis's most devoted fans, those who'd come to watch the judge dismantle a politician, were now shaking their heads at each of his deflections, visibly wrestling with their loyalty as Crockett's evidence mounted. Even the producers, tucked behind their consoles, began to cut back and forth between the two with a frenetic urgency, sensing the old model of control was crumbling in real time. Mathis, usually the master of escalation, tried to regain footing with his signature authority. He leaned forward, voice raised, straining for the familiar cadence of command. "This is my courtroom. I ask the questions. I hold guests accountable, not the other way around." But the words fell flat. The power in the room had shifted, the crowd's reactions now favoring Crockett's calm, composed rebukes over the judge's increasingly defensive tone. What happened next would have been unimaginable in any other taping. Crockett rose, not part defiance but part invitation. Her voice stayed steady as she met the judge's gaze, unwavering. "Accountability isn't a one-way street, Judge," she said. "The person behind the bench should be as answerable as anyone they question." There was no applause line, only the hush of realization. The emperor's robes were halfway gone. From her seat, she began to recount what justice looks like when the rules aren't preset for entertainment. When lives, not ratings, are on the line. With each example, freed defendants, passed reforms, exposed corruption, the audience felt the reset. Every fact, every document, was a strike against the old order of TV justice. Mathis's next attempt at control didn't just falter, it backfired. When he tried to challenge the relevance of her revelations, Crockett simply asked, "Do you deny signing those contracts? Do you dispute the contents of those emails? Or is it just uncomfortable to have the spotlight on your choices?" By now, the crowd stirred in support. A smattering of applause, a few approving shouts, and even sympathetic glances from those who entered expecting only one winner. This was more than a change in hearts. It was a real reorientation of power itself. Crockett had not only made her case, but had forced the long-reigning judge to defend his own record, a reversal so rare on his set that even the camera operators seemed to lean in closer, as if trying to capture the moment when the king's crown slipped for all to see. Eventually, Mathis retreated to a defensive refrain, his voice quieter, the steely edge gone. "We all have choices. Maybe it's time for new voices in this space." Crockett nodded, smiling softly, not in triumph but in vindication. "That's exactly what people deserve. Someone who answers to them, not to old deals or old habits." As the segment drew to a close, the audience, moved by the rare spectacle of power giving way to earned authority, erupted, not with division, but with genuine admiration. Crockett's presence hadn't just exposed a chink in the armor of TV justice. It had shifted public expectations of who calls the shots when the stakes are real, reminding viewers everywhere that real accountability is a force even the most powerful can't escape forever. This was more than a segment. It was a signal. The days of unchallenged control were over, and a new dynamic demanding transparency from every seat of power had been set in motion. The broadcast had barely finished when the true aftershocks began. Judge Mathis's courtroom, once a shrine to television order and spectacle, became the hottest trending story in the country. Clips of Jasmine Crockett's takedown circulated at breathtaking speed, flooding timelines, group chats, and national news feeds in a matter of minutes. Some called it the moment TV justice broke. Others simply knew something big had changed, even if they couldn't yet say what. On every major platform, hashtags like #Crockett receipts, #Mathis meltdown, and #justice reversal skyrocketed into the trending lists. Accounts that had never mentioned courtroom TV suddenly shared and dissected clips, while commentators, podcasters, and influencers leaped into the fray. Millions watched and rewatched Crockett calmly producing documents, the judge's stunned reactions, and the audience's slow shift in allegiance. National news wasn't far behind. Morning broadcasts opened with the explosive reversal on Judge Mathis's set. Editorials flooded in, some praising Crockett for her preparation and transparency, others defending the judge as a symbol of an older, more orderly era. Political analysts debated whether the moment marked a cultural sea change, one where viral accountability would become the new normal for those in power. Prominent opinion writers argued it was about more than two personalities clashing. For Judge Mathis, the days that followed brought relentless scrutiny. Investigative reporters dug into his business ties, while opinion polls showed a sharp dip in public trust among his core fan base. Ratings surged temporarily, curiosity trumped loyalty, but the internet didn't easily let the questions about conflict of interest fade. Mathis's team released carefully worded statements, insisting his advocacy had always been separate from his business. But the damage to his unassailable mystique lingered, signaling that the age of unquestioned authority, even for a television legend, might be ending. Jasmine Crockett, by contrast, became an instant folk hero to many. Her social media followers ballooned. The phrase "bring receipts" entered the media lexicon as a shorthand for demanding proof and refusing to take statements at face value. Headlines asked if this was the start of a new, more transparent era for politics and public discourse. The showdown became something bigger than the two participants, a referendum on how America interrogates its leaders, institutions, and even its heroes. The next time a familiar authority figure raised their gavel, the public's first reaction was no longer to accept the verdict, but to ask, what's really behind the scenes? The days when showbiz order went unchallenged were over. The culture had shifted, sending a clear message. Receipts matter, accountability is essential, and sometimes the real verdict is the one delivered after the cameras stop rolling. As the last echoes of Crockett's compelling rebuttal faded and the glare of Judge Mathis's spotlight softened, the sense of finality was unmistakable. Yet, contrary to the familiar routine where a gavel signaled closure and a judge authored the last words, tonight's ending felt radically different. Accountability, once a one-way street trafficked by those in positions of power, had become a roundabout, demanding proof and transparency at every turn, no matter how storied the name behind the bench. This confrontation wasn't just the climax of a single episode, it was the start of a larger reckoning. It forced everyone, audiences at home, TV pundits, internet commentators, and even the old guard of public figures, to ask new questions about legacy. What actually endures, a lifetime delivering perfect sound bites, or the tangible, gritty outcomes that mark real change? For decades, Judge Mathis measured his legacy in the currency of influence. Millions of viewers, carefully curated moments of tough love, and the reverence that comes with outlasting rivals in a cutthroat industry. But in a single broadcast, Crockett reframed the scorecard. She positioned accountability not as a tool for the powerful to wield, but as a standard for everyone, including those who call themselves arbiters of justice. She showed the difference between a legacy built on viral moments and one constructed on stubborn, often unseen labor, writing, defending, and passing the laws that reach beyond the next commercial break. What comes next feels inevitable, yet thrillingly undefined. The country watched as Crockett's Bring Receipt philosophy swept through social media and newsrooms. Leaders across all sectors, from city councils to boardrooms, began preparing for their own reckoning, knowing the standards have been raised. Accountability, it seems, is no longer a performance for the stage or screen. It is a living, breathing expectation, one that will chase authority figures wherever they claim their power. Legacies are no longer safe, no matter how carefully they've been built. Young changemakers, emboldened viewers, and skeptical constituents will keep asking, show us the work, prove the impact, who benefits when the show ends, and what is left behind once the clapping stops. Television courtrooms may still draw an audience, but the age of unchallenged judgment, rendered from a single seat and never reviewed, has ended. As the studio lights dimmed on Judge Mathis's once unchallenged domain, a new reality took hold. The truest test of a legacy is not found in applause or ratings, but in the willingness to stand exposed by the facts, to learn from scrutiny, and to keep earning trust long after the credits roll. That ultimately is the lasting lesson and the promise of this unforgettable confrontation. What happens next is up to every viewer, every leader, and every generation inspired by what real accountability looks like in the modern age.